hello everyone. I think I'm gonna change the topic a little bit to a little bit more green subjects, and thanks a lot for the invite. This is about Mexico, and probably you have heard about data valence before, and multivalence is what we sort of like conceptualize or the term we gave to what's happening in Mexico these days. So I'm gonna talk about how we started some projects that we call citizen-led science in Mexico. What is the difference between that and citizen science? Is basically that the people that work with us are co-designing the stuff, they govern the data, they govern the technologies, and instead of experts calling the shots, is the mothers of the disappeared, the victims of kidnapping, the ones designing with us what's gonna happen. So we are kind of like fixated with this notion of what the hell is data justice? Do we even know what justice is? Do we need to define it beforehand? Or is that something that we should avoid? Our answer is that we should avoid defining what data justice is beforehand. We need to experiment with it, do the empirical work, and then design based on that. So I'm gonna be thinking about power, participation, and design in Mexico, and then I hope this is not gonna be a depressing 15 minutes. Anyway, so what are the origins of these data justice projects we're gonna be talking about? Basically, here should be this video. What you're gonna see now is a small video of the mothers of the disappeared that worked with us back in 2014 to design a DNA database that was managed, governed, and created by them. So what was new in our project was that instead of a state owning a DNA forensic database, it was the mothers of the disappeared, the ones that, of course, collected their own DNA to search for their kids and govern their forensic database. I mean, this sounds very simple, right? It's like do-it-yourself genetics, more or less what you would do if you send your DNA to 24andMe or 23andMe, right? And the thing is that is to search for your kids in mass graves and to challenge the Mexican state. There's something completely wrong with the way we think about forensic science and data, and that is that we are asking the states that might be involved in the crimes they are searching and kind of like searching for the disappeared, but they might be involved in the disappearances themselves. So the whole way in which we think about humanitarian practice, I think it's based on a conflict of interest. And it's kind of wild and weird why we don't tackle that, right? So anyway, this is the way we kind of think about data justice and how we do things in terms of doing ethnographic research and then what we call participatory action research. And what is the difference between participatory research and participatory action research is mainly that we are dealing with injustice, okay? So participatory action research is not just about putting people around a table, but actually dealing with inequality and the thorny, ugly issues of everyday life. Actually, I brought some cards for the last bit of the presentation, just 3 sets of cards. So it's kind of like a device we created to deal with those things. Anyway, after these projects dealing with disappearance, kidnapping, and all the other ugly things that have to do with spyware in Mexico as well. You should know that Mexico is the #1 consumer of Pegasus, which is a spyware to check and surveil journalists and climate change activists, developed by some people in Israel called the NSO Group. And if you know something about what happened with Jamal Khashoggi and all these horrible things, they use that spyware to get him. Okay, I'm not gonna go into details. If you know, yeah, it's a very sad story, but that's what's happening in Mexico very commonly. It's the #1 place where they kill journalists, climate change activists, of course, mothers of the disappeared that are searching for their kids in mass graves are also the targets. So we started thinking a little bit about what does it mean to talk about data justice and engaging with publics in ways that are not just about kind of disseminating results and changing the balance of power between us, the experts that come from academic institutions, and the people that actually have to face these injustices on the ground. And one thing that we found out is that in the literature, I don't know why again, everyone, including the person, Susanna Chobov, that created this notion of surveillance capitalism, to the colonial scholars, think that the answer to injustices is to have more sovereignty. And I think that's actually the problem. Okay, sovereignty is linked with authoritarian rule. And I don't know why we have been captivated by this notion that if you give more authority to someone or some institution that it has the collective will, things are going to be solved. For us, sovereignty is the problem, not the solution. So we start with an anti-sovereign approach to technological design and data, which is also a mess. I'm not going to lie to you, okay? Then we think, the other thing is that instead of challenging power, we think a little bit more about rechanneling power in our design. And what does that mean? It means that instead of going to the parliament and wait for 10 years for your MP to listen to you or whatever, you actually start doing things on your own. And if they catch up, good for them. If they don't, then you're developing your own political community. But if you engage in challenging the powerful, then you're playing with their own rules. So actually you lose time and momentum, and it's the worst thing that happens. And somehow, again, academics, we are all about resistance. Resistance is the worst thing. Avoid it. Well, at least that's what we think. It makes sense for us as well, because the Mexican state is a little bit, dangerous and corrupt, and you can get killed. So it's also safer not to engage with them in any deep way. So I have a bias here. So the third thing is the ontology sucks. And what does that mean? We have no idea how the world is going to pan out. That's why we need to do research. And if you have an ethical sort of like mindset that already knows what is ethical and good before you do research, probably you're going to get it wrong. Okay? So all the ontological approaches that tell you what you should do before you do it are going to reproduce inequality. So then the fourth kind of principle we have is to take sides. The worst thing that happens when you're dealing in humanitarian spaces and when you're dealing with injustice is to be neutral. And this is an open critique to the UN, to the International Commission of Missing Persons, to the Red Cross that work with us. Sorry if any of you work with them. But they talk about neutrality, right? But when you're neutral in the middle of a conflict in which the state is killing its people, that seems wrong, okay? And actually reproduces inequality. So we think that you need to take sides. Impartiality is just for the Red Cross in the 19th century, okay? Not anymore. And of course, challenge me if you think this is crazy and absurd. And the final thing is design against efficiency. So the other thing that we have when we engage in, I'm a sociologist of science, so I spend years, literally years, working with scientists to then think about how they produce knowledge. So I'm obsessed with these things. But they have this idea that everything has to be efficient, all right? So it doesn't matter what you do, you need to make it efficient. Sometimes that's the worst way to do technologies. In fact, I would say that universities are great because they are inefficient, okay? We can do research because we're going to think about efficiency. We're experimenting with the world. We should extend that same privilege to the people working with us in the field, okay? And that means when you deal with mothers of disappeared that are mourning, you don't want to make an efficient technology. You want to make a technology that adapts to their emotional kind of like ups and downs, right? Because there's a lot of ups and downs when you're searching for your kids in mass graves. And finally, there's a lot of things that tell us about how to care for things. And this is not anything against the feminists. My discipline is just a child of feminism. Sociology of science only exists because feminism exists. But I think that we are too obsessed with caring and we don't learn how to care less about certain things. And this is why I'm going to show you one of the soap operas that we developed to talk about kidnapping and these ugly things that we deal with in everyday life. And it's because the BBC very kindly asked us to be their script advisors for a program they call Silent Witness. I don't know if you've seen that. It's super cool. I loved it. And I was so excited when they called us to do this kind of CSI thing, and they wanted to talk about the mothers of disappeared, and they did a season finale. But the only thing is that I told them, please don't do three things. Don't give us a white savior, right? If you go to Mexico, avoid like the white forensic scientist telling people how they're going to solve the problem. Of course, they didn't hear me. They have a protagonist. The other thing is they made one of the mothers of disappear the bad guy. So that means I cannot show this. It was good. It was kind of cool thing. I don't blame them. But I cannot show this to mothers of disappear. It's kind of like super insulting, right? So even though I was super excited, 8 million people saw this, then I could not do anything with that. And finally, Well, they didn't engage with the materiality of forensic science at all, right? It's, as you know, technology solves the problem every time. And that is not what happens, more or less, when you do participatory action research and technological design in these scenarios. So I thought, well, I recommend you watch it, also because it's based in our project, but I could not do anything with it for my own research. So then we started thinking, how can I really engage with audiences that might not want to talk about the stuff that I want to talk about? Because I should tell you that because I'm a little bit obsessive with fieldwork, we did 40 focus groups and 17 workshops in Mexico to speak with people about kidnapping, and 85% of them, and this is a sample of like 500 people, did not want to speak about kidnapping. They don't even want to think about one of their family members being kidnapped, okay? So we actually created these. This is gonna sound, if it's too intrusive, I'll stop it. It is. But we start thinking about how we can engage with audiences. Yes, it's a bit intrusive, right? How can we engage with audiences through different media that is not just hardcore participatory action research and our, infographics. So we started doing video games and soap operas to talk about what our findings, and then change a little bit the mix. Anyway, I'm gonna go to the next bit of the project. So one of the things we learned is that people in Mexico speak about kidnapping, but only in certain contexts, and that is when they talk about soap operas. You know that we love soap operas in Mexico. Actually, whenever I go to another country, they know I'm Mexican. They tell me about all the soap operas that we have there. So that was a good idea. And then, sorry, I'm a fan of video games. And I know that you can deal with very, very hardcore, ugly topics playing. So we developed this video game that it was a kind of an ethical challenge because we left the original language, which can re-victimize you. So we have some warnings before you play it, but it's also one way in which we can be loyal to the ethnographic research we did. Okay, so that was the whole ethical thing. So if you speak Spanish, please go and play Código Secuestro. If you don't speak Spanish, wait for another 3 months while I get this sorted and translate the video game. I'm almost there. Anyway, I'm going to show you one of the soap operas we created, and then if you're okay with that, we can play. I don't know if we can play with a little card deck that we created to talk about the thorny issues of data justice and technology design and climate change, because the GSI is all about climate change. That's one of the things now I'm dealing with injustice, war, and climate change, which is a very grim topic as well. Anyway, so I'm going to show you the one episode that we created so people in Mexico can engage both with kidnapping and data in ways that I think are interesting, strategic, and hopefully not boring. Well, that's the end. So can we show it here? Is there? Oh yeah, thanks. It has some titles.
Lo primero que tengo que contar sobre mí es que mis amigos no me dicen Jorge. Todos me conocen como Juárez, excepto mi mamá Estela, porque vengo de Ciudad Juárez. La mamá de mi hijo se llama Margarita, como la que fue esposa de Benito Juárez. Incluso unos dicen que me parezco, pero yo no creo. Margarita y yo nos dejamos porque ninguno de los dos queríamos estar en esa relación. Lo único que nos unía era Chavita. Pero él decidió quedarse con su mamá. Lo veo cada fin de semana y casi siempre me cuenta algo que ya sé porque me lo dice su mamá o lo veo en su Face.
Nos vemos en la noche. Bye.
Hoy vi a mi hijo y me di cuenta de que no tenemos tantas cosas de qué hablar. A veces siento que a mí no me pasa nada. Como que desde que vivo solo con mi mamá me la paso así, solito y sin nada interesante que contar. Pero por eso quiero cambiar y mostrar mi lado divertido. Pues no, ¿eh? No soy muy millonetas ni nada por el estilo, pero no estoy tan amolado como pareciera. Tengo mucho que ofrecer. Oye, yo no soy de esos que engañan a las chavitas para abusar de ellas o algo así. Después de todo este tiempo, tú ya sabes todo de mí, pero yo de ti casi nada. ¿Qué te parecería contármelo cara a cara? ¿Nos vemos?
¿Ya te vas a ver con alguien o qué?
Sí, y ya voy bien tarde.
Es con la que te mensajeas todos los días, ¿verdad?
Chance. Bye.
Cuídate, bye.
A ver, necesito que esté tranquila. Tenemos secuestrado a su hijo, pero se lo vamos a devolver en cuanto nos dé lo que pidamos. ¿Ok? Estela, si usted me cuelga esta llamada, automáticamente se despide de su hijo. No, no se lo voy a pasar, porque aquí pinches mando yo, ¿ok? Deje de llorar y dígame, ¿cuánto dinero tiene a la mano para salvar la vida de su hijo?
Deje el dinero y las tarjetas en el hotel que le acabo de decir. Y señora, no le vaya a decir a nadie porque tenemos intervenido su teléfono. Estela, si comete una pendejada, se va a arrepentir. ¿Estamos? Si nos cambia la jugada, señora, hasta el pinche chava va a salir jodido. Lo estamos vigilando.
¿Dónde estabas?
¿Qué pasó? En el cine.
¿Estás bien?
Sí, mamá, ¿qué pasó?
Me llamaron que te tenían secuestrado. Les di todos mis ahorros. Ay, qué bueno que estás bien, hijo.
No, tranquila. Ya. ¿Cómo que te hablaron?
Ay, mijito lindo.
Estoy bien, estoy bien.
En otras noticias, autoridades locales continúan la búsqueda del periodista
All right,
Rafael.
so thanks a lot for watching the soap opera. So we did this with Mexican filmmakers, young Mexican filmmakers, to talk about some of the stuff that is happening in Mexico these days. This is called virtual kidnapping. Lots of people don't know about that. Actually, most of the profitable ways of kidnapping someone is not to have a whole team, but actually do these kind of things, right? In which is kind of an extortion. People don't know that they are somewhere having a nice trip, and then they use that time to get the family. And they do that through understanding most of your social media dynamics, so they need to plan this, they need to have a little like intelligence units. And this was designed to talk about certain things about kidnapping that are not well known in Mexico, right? Some people that we talked about, they don't know that some of these are family units, okay? That they do this to have an extra income. They didn't believe that that was happening, including my father-in-law, who was outraged by that. And he said that I was making bad publicity for Mexico, so I needed to make sure that I mentioned this. This is not happening everywhere, not all Mexicans, okay? So finally, this is the way in which we think we can use ways in which kind of like media, this is mostly in YouTube, you can watch the other three, and we're gonna hopefully in September show the last two that are about political kidnapping and journalism in Mexico in a big launching event. So this is the way we talk about data justice in Mexico and how data is linked with criminality. Now, if you are okay with that, I have 3 card sets. That you can use if you want to think with us a little bit of how to do this type of project. So we created these little things. I don't know if we have enough time to really play with them. I think that's, but if you want to see them, this is the way in which we want to think about data justice in a more kind of like practice-based approach rather than us giving you a boring lecture. The soap opera should be good. So if you're interested, you can take a look, and I brought some of these co-production Oracle things. So you can, if you're doing projects or engaging with communities, think about some of the thorny issues that emerge when you're dealing with data, especially very sensitive data, such as kidnappings, or disappearances or violence, and how you deal with that, how you govern that data, who is able to produce new technologies, and so on. And that's all. Thanks a lot for your time, and sorry for taking more.